Welcome to Science in Your Shopping Cart, a new series that shows how science touches many of the products you buy at the grocery store, from new varieties of fruits and vegetables to technological advances that make your food safer, cheaper, and tastier. I'm Todd Silver. We're here at the National Agricultural Library in Beltsville, Maryland, and we're checking out some interesting exhibits related to agriculture. Here they have an exhibit on one of America's favorite snacks, popcorn. Well, it says here that nearly all the world's popcorn production occurs in the U.S. Oh, and how about this? In southwestern Utah, a 1,000-year-old popped kernel of popcorn. It was found in a cave inhabited by predecessors of the Pueblo Indians. I wonder what they were watching while they were tossing popcorn in their mouths. Popcorn, of course, comes from corn, which is a cereal crop. And corn, along with rice and wheat, are three of the most widely grown crops in the world. Corn, wheat, rice, barley, and oat, these are all known as cereal crops, which are actually grasses that are grown for their edible grains. These crops provide fundamental nutritional building blocks for our bodies. What we're talking about here are the basic nutrients for our bodies to live, work, get energy, and avoid diseases. These grains are the backbone of agriculture, and they're critical to communities across the globe. They're also under siege from insects and diseases, as well as changing global patterns, which can alter the landscape of how and where these critical food products can be successfully grown. In this season of Science in Your Shopping Cart, we're going to take a trip down the cereal crop aisle. We'll dive into the challenges of growing popular cereal crops. We'll explore the growing popularity of ancient grains, and we'll taste a rice that's fit for an emperor. Our first stop is in the Pacific Northwest, where all that rain makes for both ideal and challenging growing conditions for wheat. When you picture America's heartland, what comes to mind? Rolling acres of wheat fields is probably at the top of your list. And that makes sense, since Kansas, North Dakota, and Minnesota are three of the top wheat-producing states in the country. But what about Washington in the Pacific Northwest? Well, believe it or not, Washington was the fourth leading wheat producer in 2022 and 23, with over 2.2 million harvested acres. So it makes sense that here in Pullman, Washington, researchers are testing and developing new varieties of wheat that are resistant to the crop's major disease threats, including stripe rust.
Stripe rust is one of the most important diseases for wheat. The disease is caused by a fungal pathogen we call Paccinia stripiformis. When stripe rust emerges and develops to a very severe level, it can completely damage the crop and reduce the grain yield by even up to 100%.
That's Yamin Chen, a research plant pathologist with ARS's Wheat Health, Genetics, and Quality Research Unit here in Pullman. Stripe rust is one of the most devastating diseases for wheat and other cereal crops. Not cereal like cornflakes or my favorite Count Chocula, but cereal crops such as barley, rye, and of course wheat. Wheat is the third most commonly grown crop in the U.S., behind only soy and corn. American farmers produce almost 2 billion bushels of wheat per year. More importantly, wheat is a staple crop for people all over the world, and stripe rust has appeared across the globe, crippling production in some areas. But what is stripe rust?
Stripe rust is a fungal disease, and the pathogen utilizes the water and the nutrition from the plants to grow fungal. It then produces the next generation of the spores, millions of the spores from one plant that affect other plants. Stripe rust damages the plants by reducing photosynthesis, which reduces the plant growth and grain yield. It is a big concern for farmers.
Stripe rust first appears on the leaves of the plant, looking like small lesions. They grow into rust-looking stripes, often yellow or light orange in color. Inside the plant, the fungus sucks water and nutrients from the plant, leaving it to die. Stripe rust can be chameleon-like because the physical pattern found on the plant leaves can be confused with other diseases, such as leaf rust, so the farmer may not know which diseases to treat. Symptoms can also vary by the type of wheat, the region the wheat is grown, and other environmental conditions. Pretty gloomy, right? But I haven't even gotten to the worst part yet.
The spores easily spread by wind and land on other plant surfaces, where they can affect other plants of wheat, barley, and some grasses.
That means stripe rust can not only affect crops on one farm, but easily carry over to neighboring farms, where it can affect wheat and other crops, including barley. So how do we stop stripe rust from spreading? Fungicide treatment could help reduce stripe rust, but farmers have to catch the pathogen in its early stages, and they have to apply the correct fungicide, which is tricky because, as I said earlier, stripe rust can appear like other diseases. It's also dependent not only on wind transportation, but climate conditions that change year to year. So one year a farmer may have little problem with stripe rust, but the next, it can wipe out 80% or more of their crop.
We offer guidance to farmers on when to use fungicide and the type of fungicide and how many times. This is critical for managing this disease on your farm.
Farmers appreciate the guidance, but what they really need are new varieties of wheat that are resistant to stripe rust disease. And that's exactly what Chen and his colleagues are delivering.
This is the major strategy to control stripe rust. So we work together with breeding programs throughout the country to develop resistant varieties. And now most of the varieties grown in the United States, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, have quite good resistance. But not every variety is perfect for resisting stripe rust.
The lab here has been working with wheat breeders across the country for decades, and many of their most successful lines are still being planted today. But you can't just breed for disease resistance. It also has to have high yields. Because, let's face it, what good is a variety that's resistant to stripe rust if it doesn't produce well?
For example, if we have varieties that produce 150 bushels per acre, they still want to push it to 180, 200 bushels per acre, right? So that is driving the breeding programs to assure the high yield along with resistance to stripe rust.
There are over 100 wheat varieties grown in the Pacific Northwest alone, and Chen and his colleagues constantly monitor the variants of the pathogen in wheat fields.
We cannot eradicate the stripe rust pathogen or completely eliminate it because stripe rust not only affects wheat and barley, but also affects wild grasses. And wild grasses can grow anywhere, and they can produce spores and survive on wild grasses. So that is one of the difficulties.
With technological advances in gene identification, Chen and his colleagues can now identify favorable traits from existing varieties to help speed up the selection. He calls them markers. For example, he could choose to breed a variety that produces good yields early with one with strong resistance to stripe rust under disease-favorable conditions. What previously took a decade or longer to produce can now be developed in a few years, and the results are hundreds of new varieties with great potential for farmers. Chen notes that over the last 40 years, the average potential loss to susceptible varieties due to stripe rust was in the 30% range. That's nearly a third of a grower's plant. But with new varieties being planted by farmers here, the amount of loss has dropped to an average of 8%.
So, potential yield loss reduction from 33% to 8% is a big achievement. That's through many years of the hard work of plant pathologists and breeders. We work together to reach this goal. But if you think about it, the 8% of your loss is still very huge. How to control stripe rust even more is through fungicides. So our program also works on identifying effective fungicides to control strep rust.
Fungicide applications can be costly for farmers, and they can also have negative environmental and health effects if applied incorrectly. Chen conducts field studies to help farmers identify stripe rust disease, how widespread the disease is, and what type of fungicide to apply.
We provide this to growers and let them prepare. Some regions see strep rust early and need to spray fungicide. Another sees the disease a little late, so you can wait for a couple of weeks or a month to spray. We go to different places to check strep rust and also develop technology, use drone, use AI, use cell phone to monitor the field and then tell the growers, oh, this is the right time to spray.
They also develop predictive field and weather models, with over 40 years of field stripe rust data and weather data. This will help farmers decide not only what wheat varieties they should grow, but whether or not and when they should spray a fungicide based on the varieties they grow.
All these tools, the fungicides, the models, and the new varieties will help farmers grow more wheat for consumers. We want to ensure that this important staple crop is available for years to come.
In our next episode, you'll learn how a tough fungus is making our sweet corn not so sweet. Corn, a crop of many talents. You could shuck it, pop it, eat it, blend it. You could even gas up with it. It may be perhaps the most talented crop there is, like the Shohei Ohtani of cereal crops. Corn is grown just about everywhere on the planet, from Alabama to Zambia, and it's equally important not only for humans to eat, but also for feedstock, ethanol, even bioplastics. As an aside, maize is another name for corn but has a high oil content, and therefore is used for more industrial purposes. But whether you call it maize or corn, this versatile crop is essential in so many parts of our lives. But did you know that most corn varieties are actually hybrids dating back almost 100 years?
Corn has been an important crop. In the history of the last century, corn yield has increased significantly and really taken off since 1940s with the introduction of hybrid corn production. Corn is of significant importance for agriculture, but it's also a very demanding crop.
That's Xin-Chen Ni, a research entomologist at ARS's Crop Genetics and Breeding Research Unit in Tifton, Georgia. Ni is looking at how corn plants get stressed and how those stressors invite diseases and pathogens to proliferate inside the crop. It's not too dissimilar to us humans. When we get stressed, our immune system doesn't work as well, which enables viruses like colds and flus to get into our system and make us sick. Corn plants get stressed by humidity, heat, drought, and other factors, and when they get stressed, they have a hard time fighting off pathogens carried by insects feeding on them. The end result is some nasty corn. Ever open up an ear of corn and notice the ends are all chewed off? Or the kernels look like they have green mold on them? Or even worse, the kernels look rotted and are turning black? These are all the results of pests not only eating the crops, but they open the door for diseases and contamination. Ni showed me a few images of corn ears that have been afflicted with diseases.
This picture, it really shows you how nasty the corn ear can be. The green mold shown on this picture shows the fungus infection. The fungus is aspergillus flavus. The fungus also produces aflatoxins. Aspergillus flavus can produce 4 different types of toxins: B1, B2, G1, and G2. But B1 is the most important one, and it's identified as a Group 1 carcinogen.
As if insects and toxins aren't enough problems, right now in the southern states like Georgia, heat, humidity, and drought are causing major stress in cornfields. Nee showed me a current map of the U.S., with a red line going across the country along the lines of the southern states. That line represents the severe stress line and potential aflatoxin risk for corn production. He said by the end of this century, that line can move all the way up to the northern states, affecting the entire corn belt in our heartland.
Tifton, Georgia is located at 31.5 degree north parallel. It has been an ideal location for conducting comprehensive studies on drought, heat, insect and disease resistance, as well as aflatoxin contaminations in corn. What we are doing in Tifton, it's applicable to understanding the aflatoxin contamination problems worldwide. It has been projected at the end of 2100, the Midwest Corn Belt would no longer be suitable for corn production. I think this is really alarming.
At the heart of the problem is aflatoxin, a naturally occurring toxin. The fungal spores can be airborne, and its spores can land just about everywhere, much like a flu virus. It's produced by fungi called Aspergillus flavus and Aspergillus parasiticus. This fungus is abundant in warm and humid regions and can contaminate corn as well as other crops, especially when they're stressed. When plants get stressed from the heat, or a drought or insect damage, the fungus grows, which increases the aflatoxin levels. Once the toxin gets over a certain threshold, the corn is deemed too damaging for human or animal consumption.
Common way to explain this is the plant is stressed, and the fungus comes in and infects the corn ears. And then, when the corn plant is infected by the fungus, the plant will respond to produce defensive chemicals. And the chemically stressed fungus will then produce more toxin. It's just another layer of difficulty for studying host plant resistance.
This is a major issue for U.S. agriculture, considering that corn ranks third in production value among row and forage crops. In 2023, over 76 million bushels of corn were produced in the U.S. This tricky problem is exacerbated by so many factors, including stress, toxins, drought, heat, insects. Even the plant's own defense mechanisms are playing against it. Nee and his colleagues studied ways how all these factors contributed to the aflatoxin contamination, both individually and in tandem.
We have to further examine the genetics of both crop and the pest in multiple pest resistance that contributes to aflatoxin reduction. Has any other insect resistance involved or contributed? Is there cross resistance or not? Some years drought is important, other years it's puzzling. Drought was severe and aflatoxin was not necessarily severe. There is something out there that we have not identified yet.
Nee and his colleagues looked at how this toxin-producing fungus affected different varieties of corn, like sweet corn, popcorn, Indian corn, and unique relatives, such as teosinte, eastern gamma grass, and Job's tears. Using all this data, they combined several different corn types to create new lines with multiple stress resistance and the ability to reduce aflatoxin contamination. They also looked at traits to help curb stress in corn, such as early maturity so it doesn't have to face long bouts of heat and drought, along with drought tolerance, heat tolerance, and resistance to a host of insects. The results have been impressive. These new breeding crosses, including one of them dubbed 715, have already shown resistance to drought as well as insects and diseases.
Last year, I harvested this ear from the field from our plot number 715. I was so excited. It was so clean without either insect damage or fungal infection.
Nee said these newly developed maize lines are not only important to the southern U.S. states, but will benefit future corn production in the Midwest Corn Belt.
By using integrated approaches and examining both genetic and ecological interactions between corn plants and its pests, I think we are much closer to comprehensively understanding what's going on in the field with aflatoxin contamination in combination with all stress factors such as drought, heat, insects, and diseases. This has been a serious problem for decades. I hope our work will lay a foundation for the successors, future entomologists and breeders to find solutions for these perennial problems of insect pests, diseases, and aflatoxin contaminations.
In our next episode, we'll explore the rebirth of some micronutrient and super healthy ancient grains. I love to bake. Cookies, muffins, breads, they not only look and taste great, but they fill your kitchen with pleasant aromas. Baking can be tricky though, if you have a gluten allergy or you don't want to use all-purpose flours or other refined flours. Even some of the more popular alternative flours can be troublesome for those with allergies, such as almond flour or oat flour. Rather than look to the future for a new baking flour, we can harken back to the days of our ancestors, who used a variety of nutrient-rich grains that, believe it or not, still hold up well today. We call these foods ancient grains, although the name is somewhat of a misnomer.
The ancient grain refers to a category of grains, particularly pseudo-cereals, that possess a very unique health benefit, and that's beneficial to the modern humans because we, at least for the Western world, we have enough the calories and protein, the minerals, those essential nutritional requirements for our health, but we get lost in terms of some of those micronutrients, some of those things that can help us from getting early cardiovascular diseases or potentially some other chronic diseases. And so that's kind of things that people believe that the ancient grain over time can help.
That's Dr. Sean Liu, research leader at the Functional Foods Research Unit in Peoria, Illinois. Liu is researching ways to make ancient grains more nutritional, and he wants to make them more attractive to consumers. Ancient grains include quinoa, sorghum, amaranth, and buckwheat, although some of these aren't actually grains, but pseudo-grains, meaning they're actually seeds but have similar nutrient compositions to cereal grains. Many of these ancient grains are packed with micronutrients, making them super healthy. Amaranth is rich in protein, fiber, antioxidants, and other vitamins. Sorghum is high in protein, vitamins, antioxidants, and has great versatility. Chia is a low-calorie seed that offers omega-3 fatty acids, fiber, and important vitamins like B1 and B2. Then there's the super grain quinoa.
Quinoa is a very good amino acid profile and protein content, as well as the minerals that a healthy diet requires. And it does not have some of those things that we tend to associate with diabetics, for instance, very easily digestible starch or sugars that can cause the blood sugar goes up quickly when you consume. So that's something that people find very useful, and also tastes pretty good too. One of the things about sorghum is that it contains a lot of polyphenol compounds, which is antioxidant. It has the ability of provide fiber to the consumers. Amaranth, on the other hand, has very good balance of protein and minerals and then fibers. So that is kind of things that give you very good nutritional inputs.
These ancient grains have so many nutritional benefits, so why aren't they more popular? Well, for one, they're not easy to find. However, Lou points out that grocery markets are stocking their shelves nowadays with more diverse grains and baking goods. But more importantly, consumers may not know how to cook or bake with these alternative grains.
The problem with amaranth and sorghum is that, first of all, a lot of people don't know how to deal with it. They never cook it, so they have no idea how that will end up on their plates. That's one thing. The second problem is that sorghum and amaranth do have some kind of very unique flavor. Some people find it's nutty, earthy, but it all depends on your taste bud. But some of the things can be changed or altered or masked by processing or blending with the other food materials to lessen that kind of impact.
Our senses play such a large role in what we eat, how a food tastes, how it feels in our mouths, how it smells. Trying a new food is always a challenge, even if it's healthier. Quinoa, for example, is a light, fluffy pseudo-grain with a distinct mouth feel. Sorghum has a different, almost nutty smell to it, and amaranth has a nutty, even earthy taste. These are not bad traits, but rather traits that your senses have to get used to for the best enjoyment. For example, sorghum millet, which is ground sorghum, is a nice substitute for oatmeal, and if you add other ingredients to your sorghum oatmeal, like berries, nuts, and brown sugar, you'll likely get a more enjoyable experience.
In order to make the people to consume more of those grains, I think the best idea is try to find a way to get into the food ingredient in some of the most common popular food categories. Give you an example is bakery, cookie, or bread, or whatever it is. Our goal is try to replace some of the original wheat portion with ancient grain flours. But the replacement is not that straightforward because sometimes they will alter the texture and how you process and how long you have to bake it and what kind of the texture eventually you'll find out. It's a very difficult question because, for instance, one of the examples is the amaranth flours.
Amaranth is a good baking substitute for wheat, but it doesn't have the same viscosity. That'll surely affect how it rises and finishes and tastes. Lou is mixing amaranth with oat bran, which has high viscosity, and it allows you to replace the wheat, maybe not at 100%, but rather 30 to 40%. This is still an amount where you're getting a lot more micronutrients into your baked goods.
You have to figure out scientifically what's the relationship when you replace something, what's the impact of the replacement on the final products, the texture, the color, and the flavors. That things have to be considered.
Lou and his team work closely with the food industry to add these micronutrient grains into everyday food products. For example, he recently worked with a company in Peoria to incorporate healthy grains into a school lunch program.
In the school lunch program, they add in grains by introducing dietary fibers to make them more healthy. So the kids eat a hamburger, they also eat the dietary fiber. So that's good for their health.
The one thing about these ancient grains is there's almost no end to the variety you could choose from. I asked Lou to name one ancient grain, or pseudo-grain, that he thinks Americans should try to get more of in their diet.
Personally, that's one grain we haven't even talked about it. Buckwheat is pretty good. It provides a lot of dietary fibers, minerals, and a very good protein profile. It has been consumed by a lot of people outside the United States. I mean, particularly in East Asia and East Europe. In general, it's very good health promoting ingredients.
Speaking of buckwheat, we just released a Cooking with Science video that shares some tasty buckwheat recipes, including buckwheat pasta. In fact, we have several Cooking with Science videos using ancient grains for dishes such as chicken and waffles with sorghum, farro salad, and chocolate chip cookies with teff flour. Links are in the description below. Okay, enough shameful plugs for one day. Let's get back to the podcast. What we've learned so far is that many ancient grains are packed with nutrients and could be added to everyday foods or used as a replacement for items like refined flours. And they're making inroads in our grocery markets and restaurants. But the big wave to conversion hasn't happened yet. Why is that? Lou said the biggest challenge is acceptability.
That's actually very critical. Consumers realize that their diet is not that good. The problem is that the purchase habits not driven by the consideration of those health benefit issues. They are still driven by taste or familiarities with the products they used to consume. So you can have all the ideas and you can discover all the health benefits. When it comes to consumer acceptability, you will have issue. One of the strategy we are developing is try to, yes, we realize a lot of people love chips, potato chips. Our goal is trying to find kind of an alternative or find some ingredient that will replace some of those ingredients in potato chips with something else that you actually get a benefit. So consumers can benefit without even notice their changes because the taste, texture, color, flavor exactly the same as they consumed in the past. So that would be the ideal situation for us.
Check out our next episode, where we try some rice that's fit for a king or an emperor. I'm a big sushi fan. Nigiri, maki, sashimi, you name it, I'll eat it. I've even learned how to make sushi at home, which means buying specialty rice that's stickier and a bit sweeter than white rice. Pass the soy sauce, please. Rice is a staple food for families all over the world, not just for sushi lovers like me. You may be surprised to learn that the U.S. is a major producer of rice. We plant around 3.5 million acres of rice a year. Half our rice is exported, but we also import a lot of rice, a good amount being specialty rices like jasmine and basmati.
I'm interested in specialty rices because a specialty rice brings in a unique market, a new way to sell U.S. rice. So it's a way to help the U.S. rice industry by reaching a new set of consumers. So if we can reach these new consumers, we can sell more rice.
That's Dr. Shannon Pinson, a research geneticist at the Dale Bumpers National Rice Research Center in Stuttgart, Arkansas. Here in Arkansas, where about half the rice is grown in the U.S., Pinson has been working on improving and enhancing specialty rice varieties, including colorful red and purple rice. She's noticed a bigger demand for colorful rices after seeing an uptick in brown rice. Brown rice has become so popular that many consumers consider it a typical rice.
I love the fact that you call brown rice typical, even, to be honest with you, because brown rice really took off in 2008. So I think it's a fairly new thing for people to eat brown rice in the U.S. It was a niche market for a while. It has made it to the standard grocery store. That's exciting.
Brown rice has become more popular because it's more nutrient dense than white rice. Brown rice is a whole grain, while white rice is milled. Brown rice also has a distinct earthy flavor that makes it heartier than white rice.
In the early 2000s, there was a growing interest in eating unmilled rice, the brown rice, as we call them. Until we knew that the consumer was willing to eat that brand, we did not have a really high interest in developing brands that had premium qualities. Then in 2008, rice was declared to be a whole grain, and that we could put the whole grain logo onto rice packages. And that just opened a lot of thinking about how do we then improve that brand even further with nutritional content or other niche market premium values. And so that did open the market for us to think about colored brands.
Colored rices are relatively new here in the U.S., but they've been part of folklore in China for centuries. In fact, in China, purple rice was known as the emperor's rice because it was so revered that lore said only the emperor could eat it. In part, its reputation was due to its nutrient content. The Chinese viewed it as beneficial for pregnant women and the sick.
In China, they were actually conserving their colored bran rices and feeding them specifically for their pregnant ladies because they were considered highly valuable. We take folic acid, vitamins, and things in the U.S., but there they were eating purple rices because of the content and the benefits that they perceived from that. So we were aware that the rest of the world was valuing colored bran rices, and we began researching that in the U.S.
Growing, harvesting, and processing colored rice can be vastly different than white rice. It takes specialty equipment and different inputs. Some rice farmers are also hesitant because they relate colored rice to weeds.
We had a speed bump created in the U.S. by the fact that there's a weedy rice out there that the farmers have to deal with that steals the yield out of their standard table rice. And that weedy rice happens to be known as red rice. So there are farmers in the U.S. that are very just mentally against colored brand because that indicates to them this weedy problem. And it's a problem in the mills because if they were to get a little bit of this weedy red bran into the truck that went to the mill, and the mill then parboils it, it turns this whole batch of parboiled rice pink, and it's not marketable.
Instead of being picked up by the large rice-producing farms, smaller farmers started growing red and purple rice as more of a niche product with a high market value. Pinson noted that with red and purple rice, they could charge 5 times, maybe more, than for standard white rice.
They can make a lot more per pound of rice if they can capture this market that's willing to pay a premium price for the colored brand rices. And the rice does not even have to produce as much per acre to make a profit. There's a definite market out there willing to pay high value for it.
The market comes from consumers not only wanting specialty rices, but also foods that are more nutritious. Colored rice is nutrient dense, with more magnesium, potassium, and calcium than white rice. There's also more fiber, like 4 times more fiber, which makes it more appealing to diabetics. Pinson explains the science behind that.
And when you get that increased fiber along with your carbohydrates, the fiber reduces the digestion rate of the carbohydrates. You lower the glycemic index of the rice. So when people become diabetic, one of the first things a nutritionist will recommend is they switch from white rice to brown rice, because just eating that bran along with the carbohydrates inside the rice makes it more amenable to a stable blood sugar rate because it slows the digestion process of the starches that are still there. So yeah, there's a lot of benefit to eating the brown rice. And of course, purple rice has those same benefits plus more. Purple and red rice also have compounds known as antioxidants. If you can take in more antioxidants, you can reduce the inflammation and problems that are associated with diabetes and the organ injuries that happen from the diabetes. If you can decrease that inflammation by eating antioxidants, you're healthier.
Interestingly, the color of the red and purple rice comes from their antioxidant compounds. When we think of antioxidants, we typically think of berries, strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, because their color is derived by the amount of antioxidant compounds in them. The darker the color, the more the antioxidants. Same thing with colored rice. But what if you combined red and purple rice? Would you then have a super rice?
We are in the process of creating rice that has both purple and red. We found that when we produce both the anthocyanins and the tannins in the same rice, you actually increase the content of both of them. So you can get even higher antioxidant content when you put both in the same rice. And that surprised us actually because the two compounds, they actually share a biosynthetic pathway. For many, many steps, they share compounds and then they branch off. And we had originally hypothesized that because of that, they would be competing for that point where they branch apart, but it turns out that when we turn on the gene to produce more anthocyanins, we can get more tannins, not less. So apparently these genes that turn on the anthocyanin also boost the flux through the shared pathway. And the same thing for the tannin genes. When we turn on the tannin production genes, we can get more anthocyanins. So we have found that when we put the red and the purple together, we can get even higher antioxidant activity in the rice.
A healthier rice with a unique flavor and hardiness? Sign me up. But how does it taste? Well, I decided to try it myself. Similar to brown rice, you have to cook it longer than white rice, and you have to use more water in the rice cooker. It's certainly heartier than white rice, so I would eat it with grilled chicken and steak and mushrooms rather than a lighter dish such as salmon. But it also works well in a bowl with sautéed vegetables and something nutty like sunflower seeds. The taste is similar to brown rice, but the color really pops, especially the red rice. The purple rice is very dark, almost like a black rice. So if you want to add some color to your meal, either of these varieties are a good choice. Back to the science. Pinson said she's currently working on ways to make rice even healthier, including getting more potassium in rice.
FDA has, in the last 3 years, changed the labels on food products They require now potassium as a percent of the daily recommended content to be included on food labels because their research showed that U.S. diets were often deficient in potassium. So we are working on how do we get potassium increased in rice. So I'm working on how do we increase the potassium in rice, and it turns out that as we increase potassium, we also increase magnesium and phosphorus. So those three elements, when we increase one, we increase the other, and that's just benefit plus benefit plus benefit.
Perhaps it won't be long before they start using these healthier rice varieties in sushi. I'll get the wasabi. Join our next episode where we learn some fun and interesting facts about grains. All this grain talk is making me hungry, so while I'm cooking up some delicious oatmeal, here's some fun facts about cereal crops. Wheat is one of the oldest crops in the world. It was grown over 10,000 years ago. That's some major history, but not compared to oats, which were eaten over 30,000 years ago. Why are these grains called cereal crops? The word cereal comes from the Roman goddess Ceres, who was the protector of agriculture and grain crops, among other things. There are 6 types of wheat grown in the United States: hard red winter, hard red spring, soft red winter, hard white, soft white, and durum. Hard red winter is often used for breads and as an all-purpose flour. Hard red spring is a more artisan wheat, used for bagels, pizza crust, and soft rolls. Hard white can be used for whole wheat, tortillas, and flatbreads. Soft red winter and soft white are good for baking cookies, pastries, and cakes. And then there's durum, which is often associated with pastas. Did you know that corn is a vegetable, a fruit, and a grain? It all depends on how it's harvested. Corn is used for just about everything, including in your car. We fill up with corn-based ethanol, and car parts such as carpeting, upholstery, and the trim in your interior may be made with corn-based plastic. Speaking of corn, there's a mystery surrounding the origins of popcorn. Perhaps Batman could help. You see, the oldest ears of popcorn ever found were discovered in the Bat Cave of west central New Mexico. Ranging from smaller than a penny to about 2 inches, the oldest Bat Cave ears are about 5,600 years old. Rice can be a great binder, but a Great Wall of binder? Yes! The Great Wall of China is actually held together with sticky rice. Speaking of rice, did you know that uncooked white rice, when properly stored, can stay fresh for over 10 years? Not so much for brown rice, which due to the oil in the bran can cause it to oxidize. Brown rice should be cooked within a few months. Did you know that the US is the largest producer, consumer, and exporter of corn in the world? We sure like our corn. You may be surprised to hear that one of the top cereal crops produced in the United States is actually sorghum. That's because it's a major ingredient in animal feed, due to its richness in vitamins and minerals. Oats are another popular animal feed ingredient. In fact, in 2024, over 50 million bushels of oats were used for animal feed. Oats were once thought to be a pesky weed, which grew between wheat and barley. Who knew weeds could taste so good? Here are some other nutrient-packed grains you should be cooking with. Farro is popular in Italian cuisine and it's often used in salads and risottos. Bulgur is popular in the Middle East because it's packed with vitamins and minerals and easily added to soups and salads. Teff grains have twice the iron and 3 times the calcium as other grains. It can be used in baking and also in soups and stews. And millet is a staple grain in Africa, as it's easily digestible and is a good base for soups and stews. When baking or cooking with grains, be creative and try something new. No matter the grain you choose, or pseudo-grain, your body will thank you. In our next episode, we see how researchers are using the art of negotiation to deal with a stubborn disease. Okay, what am I putting in my overnight oats? Blueberries, raisins, some chia seeds, and steel-cut oats. Add in some oat milk, and in the fridge you go. Oats are some of the healthiest grains you can put in your body. They're a great source of fiber, and they contain lots of vitamins and minerals, as well as antioxidants. Studies have shown that oats can help lower cholesterol, which in turn can lower risk of heart disease. Oats are also a versatile grain. You can make so many healthy things with oats, and they're gluten-free. Now if they could just make oat pizza. Oh wait, there's a recipe for that too.
Pizza's ready. Order up.
As vital as oats are for the human body, they're also an important crop for farmers.
Oats are very important to U.S. agriculture because they occupy a space that the other cereals don't occupy, which is essentially a healthy food for people that are worried about health issues such as cholesterol and issues like that. Oat production in U.S. has been declining because majority of it has moved to Canada, but growers are realizing and industry is realizing that it's really important to bring it back to the United States.
That's Shair Kianian, research leader at ARS's Cereal Disease Lab in St. Paul, Minnesota. Oats used to be a staple food in America, but the availability of other grains and cereal crops have diminished its value. Recently, however, consumers have started seeing the health benefits of this cereal crop, and demand has risen. Farmers, too, are seeing the benefits of growing this crop.
It's relatively easy to grow, except usually because of how it's treated as a commodity, tends to be grown in marginal lands rather than the main agricultural fields. It's a great crop for rotation because it helps with soil health and soil stabilization. Because of that, I think most growers are now realizing the importance of having oat in their field and in their production cycle rather than putting it on marginal fields.
Oats are grown not only in the upper Midwest, like Minnesota, the Dakotas, and Canada, but in the Southwest as well. No matter where it's grown, oat farmers are dealing with a nasty disease called crown rust.
Crown rust, the way it was named, I always say, is that if you're wearing a jean and you walk in the field and you come out and feels like you rubbed your pants against a rusty iron, that's the rust fungus. It looks like rust, it behaves like rust. It's a major disease of all of the small grain cereals, wheat, barley, and oats. It affects the leaves, and essentially what it does is destroys the leaf, so the leaf is not photosynthesizing well, so essentially reduces the yield on the crop. So more rust you have, the lower your yield is. I have a picture that I use it as a backdrop on my computer of a field that is, the farmer is plowing it under, and you can see the rust coming out of the back of his machine because it's so bad and rusty that he couldn't even use it for forage, so he's plowing it under.
Crown rust is a major problem for growers. How big? A few years ago, the state of South Dakota, which is one of the larger oat-producing states, they reported a 50% loss due to crown rust. 50%! That's just not sustainable for farmers. The Cereal Disease Lab here in St. Paul develops oat lines that are resistant to crown rust. This disease is highly variable, meaning it could change rapidly, requiring constant vigilance.
Part of our work is we actually go across the United States and collect rust samples and test them in the lab to see what are the populations like. With oat crown rust, close to 90% of them are unique. So that means if you pick 10 isolates, bring them back and check them, 9 of them are individuals.
As the disease evolves, resistance to it lessens over time. A new oat variety may last 3 to 5 years before it no longer becomes resistant to crown rust. Some pesticides work well against crown rust, but pesticide applications can be expensive, and Kianian noted that many oat farmers are looking to go organic to meet consumer demand for healthy and safe food. Crown rust also spreads wide and fast.
Rust doesn't know boundaries, and it moves by air. Usually it starts off in the southern part of the U.S. because you have the crops getting greener faster, and then the wind just blows it north, and it just keeps moving farther north and goes across the border to Canada. They have the same problem, they have the same issues.
For decades, researchers looked for ways to eradicate crown rust, but because of its high variability, a different research angle was needed. Instead of trying to eradicate the disease, Kianian decided to negotiate with it.
Hey, crown rust, what's it going to take for you to lay off these oats a little bit?
Yep, you heard me, negotiation. The next best thing to getting what you want.
What we have focused on for the past 20 years is essentially what we call lines that are slow rusting, or I'm happy and you're happy kind of paradigm. Essentially, lines get rust, but do not get as much of the yield loss. So the fungus is happy, it's growing on that plant, but not too much, just enough so that the plant is also happy and growing.
The Cereal Disease Lab released 2 new oat lines in 2023. These new negotiated lines are already getting a lot of attention from breeders and the oat industry.
U.S. public programs, the university, which tends to be the major oat breeding programs, have picked it up. Canadians have picked it up and started breeding with it. And there are a couple of private companies that have picked it up.
With these new lines helping to reduce crown rust, Kianyan and his colleagues are setting their sights on combating other oat diseases, such as stem rust, as well as developing new oat varieties with higher yields and more consistent seed size, which aids in the milling process. But make no bones, or oats, about it. These new negotiated varieties could be a game changer for the oat industry. Kianyan and his colleagues are also developing additional lines to diversify the genetics of oat so that the fungus cannot easily evolve and overcome the few currently in use.
It is satisfying when you're helping out. Our mission as USDA is to help the public. So it's really nice to see the public being helped. Everybody is getting what they need. I love oats. It's a great breakfast. You have a bowl of oatmeal in the morning, you're satisfied all the way through lunch, no stacking in between.
In our next episode, we'll get into the weeds, with a common foe that affects nearly every farm in America. Would you be surprised if I told you that many food scientists actually grew up on farms? Take Martin Williams, for example. He was raised on a farm in northern Missouri, growing among other crops, corn. Williams saw firsthand the issues that farmers like his parents had to deal with day after day in order to make a living and support their local community.
We grew up in an area that has pretty highly erodible soils. I mean, we've got some big rolling hills in northern Missouri, and so soil erosion was a major challenge. We switched over from what was traditional kind of pretty extensive tillage to no-till production, and it was neat to kind of experience that, to see the benefits for soil conservation. And then some of the new challenges as well. You know, when you're going completely no-till, you're often relying more heavily on herbicides. So I think a lot about the weeds part of crop production, because that's my training. But I know there's a whole slew of other issues that today's growers are dealing with.
Williams went on to become an ecologist at ARS's Global Change and Photosynthesis Unit, located in Urbana, Illinois, just a few hours from where he farmed as a child. Williams always had a passion for trying to solve problems on the farm, especially how to deal with pesky weeds. If you mention weeds to a farmer, you'll surely get a look of disdain and frustration.
Oh, they're a challenge. You know, like many of our pests, talking about biological organisms that can evolve. We want a weed-free field, but how this doesn't happen on its own.
There are many interventions that have been used over the years to control weeds on cereal crops, like corn, wheat, barley, and oats. Herbicides have been used for decades for weed control, and they've certainly been shown to help, but over-reliance on individual herbicides has resulted in herbicide-resistant weed populations.
We do that time and again, year after year, and before long, you know, it's like, wow, that's providing no control at all. There's all sorts of herbicide chemistry, different active ingredients that target different aspects of the plant's growth. But for nearly all of these, nature finds a weakness.
Rather than rely on the same herbicide year after year, Williams advises farmers to apply a diverse strategy for managing weeds. But that's easier said than done, perhaps because it's human nature to keep using something that works well initially. That's the thing with weeds, though. They're very diverse and can quickly adapt. In short, weeds grow, well, like weeds. Williams wanted to solve the weed management issue from a different angle. He spent considerable time in crop nurseries and looked at different varieties of corn, including sweet corn, and what he found surprised him.
I just couldn't help but notice the range of different plant types. All the same crop, it's all sweet corn, but some look almost like field corn, just large, vigorous plants, and other things that kind of look like glorified onions. I mean, just spindly little narrow leaves, small plants. And I thought, gosh, is that something? How much does crop tolerate interference and how much does it suppress weeds? If we can't completely control weeds, which is often the case, are there traits that we should have in our crops that are better able to tolerate those conditions or suppress weeds?
Williams found that certain sweet corn varieties tolerated crowding better than others. Crowding is just as it sounds, bunching crop plants together and closely sharing their food and resources. This goes against many traditional planting methods. I mean, I was always taught to space my garden vegetables 6 to 12 inches apart or more. But it makes sense that if you can bunch crops together, it doesn't leave space for weeds to grow.
That's been very eye-opening, something the sweet corn industry has been highly interested in because it turns out that having greater density tolerance, crowding stress tolerance in your crop will yield better, and you can be more efficient on the acres where you're growing a crop. There's been just phenomenal increases in yield over the last half century. And this is a combination of improved genetics and better management. And that improved genetics, one of the leading things was greater density tolerance in field corn.
Based on this research, seed companies are striving to develop sweet corn varieties with greater crowding stress tolerance. In turn, farmers have been planting these crowding stress tolerant hybrids at a higher density than older hybrids. Less weeds, more yields. It's been a win-win breakthrough for farmers.
In the breadbasket of the U.S., I see weather extremes and weeds as sort of this dual threat for corn production, whether it's field corn or sweet corn. We've been trying to get a better idea of how future weather might impact corn production.
Williams and his colleagues are pouring through decades of university field crop trials to find trends and abnormalities when it comes to weed control and weather patterns. They're using machine learning technology to analyze millions of data points in an attempt to prepare crop production for the future.
We're able to compile these huge data sets of corn trials conducted under a range of environmental conditions and beginning to analyze that to look for insight into how we might change our cropping systems, how we might improve the crop itself to adapt to the challenge of weather extremes and the presence of weeds, because up until recently, most of the yield prediction models like future corn yield has assumed a weed-free environment. We're pretty confident weeds are with us for the long haul here. I mean, we can do things to minimize their impact, but we're assuming they're going to be around well into the future. So developing cropping systems that can deal with those dual threats of weeds and weather are important.
Williams and his colleagues are also mapping different conditions to determine how well herbicides work under different conditions.
We can see just how influential weather conditions are to performance of that herbicide. We published a couple of years ago where we were able to identify just what that threshold is, just how much rainfall is needed to get the herbicide in a solution to be effective for the weeds to take it up and have the effect. So it's really exciting using that data to quantify, okay, here's the kind of conditions that products work. And then also where it doesn't. And that could be very informative if we start thinking about, okay, well, what kind of future weather is predicted here in the near future?
Herbicides are used to kill weeds, some of which are vectors of crop diseases. Herbicides are designed to have a neutral effect on the crop plants themselves. However, when Williams started with ARS in 2003, crop injury from herbicides was the #1 pest management issue facing the sweet corn industry.
They were baffled by it because they didn't expect to have this herbicide injure their crop. It was a result of one gene that if there were mutant alleles at this particular location on the sweet corn genome, it would render that hybrid sensitive. What was neat is a single gene conditioned sensitivity to a lot of different herbicides that were applied post-emergence. So that was a really nice, simple solution, right? Because all the seed companies had to do was to get in the correct alleles, the functional alleles that metabolize the herbicide at at this one place, and it conferred tolerance to a lot of different post products. So we were glad to finally crack that problem solved. We'll move on.
Or at least he thought. Recently, a seed company came to him reporting severe crop injury to a brand new herbicide. This was perplexing because the company was using his previous research to ensure crop tolerance to a wide variety of post-emergence herbicides on the market. So why now? What changed?
It's really stunning. It's a type of sensitivity that is very extreme. The smallest amount of the product just will hammer the plant. Well, Nick Hausman, a researcher in my group, actually had an eye for it because of the injury symptoms. It bleaches the plant. And he said, Marty, I saw this. Somebody else's trial had some white corn plants.
What they learned was that certain lines of sweet corn, popcorn, and field corn had severe sensitivity to this new herbicide, despite the fact that the same lines were tolerant to all the other herbicides that were previously causing injury. So thanks to a seed company contacting him recently, Williams and his team conducted research that discovered a new genetic vulnerability in all types of corn, a vulnerability that he is currently developing a solution for, which may prove useful as additional herbicides are developed and commercialized.
It's good to do the research on this because while it is just one herbicide product, it's novel because it hasn't been an issue for probably at least 30, if not 40 years. Also, the few herbicide companies that are developing new products are developing some of the chemistry around the same backbone as the same molecular structure of tolpyrrolate. They're using that same pyrazole ring-based backbone for other herbicides that inhibit the HPPD enzyme. It just may be that the research we do now is relevant to some of this new chemistry coming out in the near future that growers are eagerly asking for to control weeds in corn. I think it's an exciting time for doing ag research, particularly in corn. There's just so many issues facing the growers. I wish we could deliver more quickly, but all the easy problems have been long ago fixed, and now we're left with some of these bigger challenges that take really a concerted effort by the scientific community as a whole.
In our final episode of the season, we'll raise our glass to a new variety of barley that checks all the boxes. Barley. It's an essential ingredient in most beer brewing. Malted barley often provides the flavor, color, and body for a beer. The natural sugars from barley are also essential to the fermentation process. Barley is to beer what grapes are to wine. So yeah, it's that important. You know what's also important? Keeping bugs from destroying barley crops.
Barley is an important industry in our country. It brings in, I think, over $1 billion in crop value. And as far as exports, we export $280 million worth of barley and barley products and $544 million for beer and $1.3 billion for whiskey. So it's an important part of our economy. And yeah, we need to keep barley around.
Back in the mid-'80s, a pest called the Russian wheat aphid first arrived in the United States. Almost immediately, this invasive pest began munching on wheat, barley, and other crops. It's enough to make you cry in your beer. To make matters worse, this pale green bug, with a long flat back and 6 legs, releases toxins in the plants, causing further damage. The Russian wheat aphid has caused hundreds of millions in crop damage and devastated barley farming regions in Colorado, Nebraska, and elsewhere in the U.S. The aftermath is still felt in these regions today.
As a matter of fact, Colorado ended up not growing barley anymore because it was so bad there. And of course, there were a lot of fears where it might spread. And the malting barley people in the north were worried about that coming their direction too. So my program basically started trying to find resistance for the Russian wheat aphid, which we didn't have any, and then to breed that into germplasm lines and or varieties that could be grown.
That's Dr. Dolores Morningweg, research geneticist at the Peanut and Small Grains Research Unit in Stillwater, Oklahoma. For nearly 30 years, Morningweg has been developing new crop lines that are resistant to pests such as the Russian wheat aphid. Developing new lines for pest resistance doesn't happen overnight.
Unfortunately, it takes time. We had to find resistance, then we had to breed it into barley that was adapted to Colorado. Actually did end up releasing 2 varieties, one for eastern Colorado and western Nebraska. Nebraska was in that same situation, but it took so long. They already found another crop that they liked. So barley's coming back slowly, but actually in that area, barley was mainly being grown as cover crop for drought to keep the soil from blowing away. And they basically just wanted to have enough barley back every year to be able to keep their land from disappearing. There is still barley being grown in Colorado, just not as much as there was in the beginning. And Russian wheat aphid is not as serious of a problem now as it was about 10 or 15 years ago, but it's still there and it's still around, and we have since bred resistance. So they have varieties that can grow now that are resistant.
The damage caused by the Russian wheat aphid was not only felt by farmers, but brewers, whiskey distillers, the livestock feed industry, and of course us consumers who like a little barley in our diets. Like many of its cereal crop cousins, barley is a very diverse crop, so developing new lines of barley that's resistant to different pests is a big deal across many different markets.
I released now 70 germplasm lines with Russian wheat aphid resistance, and I put them in all the backgrounds of all the preferred malting varieties. But those were all springs, and those are produced mostly in the northern states and western states. So I have worked with them, but mostly to give them the germplasm to use. They're very picky about what they use in their breeding programs, and they all have their favorites. And I had asked them to send me their favorites. I put resistance in there for Russian wheat aphid and just gave it back to them.
Recently, Morningwig had a breakthrough barley line called USDA-ARS. For the first time, this variety of barley was not only resistant to the Russian wheat aphid, but showed good resistance to greenbug and hedgehog grain aphid as well.
I think it has many advantages, but actually the main advantage is it's resistant to 3 different aphids, which is the only multiple aphid-resistant barley maybe in the world.
Morningwig used a barley variety that was developed back in the early 80s as the basis for USDA-ARS. This earlier line, called Post 90, was highly resistant to greenbugs.
Greenbug was a big problem. It doesn't occur as often now, but when it does, it's bad. And the growers have to spray, sometimes multiple times. And so, of course, we don't want that. We're definitely trying to get away from having any type of chemical dependency for resistance. I took that and I crossed it with one of my Russian wheat aphid sources. And as it turns out, we have had another new aphid show up in the country called the hedgehog grain aphid. And so far, it hasn't really caused any production loss. We're not sure whether it will develop into that or not.
The hedgehog grain aphid is a cereal pest found in many regions of the world. It was first documented in the U.S. in 2007 and has since shown up sporadically in fields. Morningwig surveys fields twice a year as they try to follow how they're adapting to crops, fields, and different weather conditions. As it turns out, they found a lot of similarities between the hedgehog grain and the Russian wheat aphid.
It's pretty much going in the same area as Russian wheat aphid. And in other countries, it's caused a lot of yield loss. We went ahead and cross-reference screened all of the known barley resistance genes for Russian wheat aphid, greenbug, and only Post 90, the recurrent parent of Fortress and Fortress, had resistance to that. So we're talking 3 aphid resistances in one line. Besides that, of course, it's great yielding. We have put it over all the different conditions in Oklahoma, and it was on the top of the list every time. So it's beat out any of the other barleys that are being grown in Oklahoma.
USDA-ARS was released in 2020, and interest for the barley line has been picking up. Morningwig said Oklahoma producers have asked for an alternative to wheat because the price of wheat can fluctuate. Barley can also be grazed like wheat, which is important in the southern plains to have that dual-purpose crop that can be used for animal feed.
I'm excited about that, and I do have people asking me for it. And the other thing I want to stress is the resistance is tolerance. So the aphids are still on the plant, but it doesn't affect the yield. And that is like a win-win, actually. You're not affecting the food chain. You're not disrupting anything in nature. And yet you're able to produce a very decent crop with good quality without having to spray. Farmers don't have to use chemicals. So it's an economic boon for them as well as for the environment.
That's all for this season of Science in Your Shopping Cart. I hope you enjoyed learning about cereal crops. Make sure you check out our other seasons. There's 10 more, by the way. and they explore everything from biomass to apples to bees. And stay tuned for our next season, where we sample some research on wine grapes. For Science in Your Shopping Cart, I'm Todd Silver. Thanks for listening.
Science in Your Shopping Cart is produced by the Office of Communications, Agricultural Research Service, an agency of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. For more information, visit www.ars.usda.gov. Follow us on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram, like us on Facebook, and watch us on YouTube.